Hello and welcome to a special Friday lunchtime edition of the Osceola Seminole Sidelines. My name is Pat Burnham, and I am joined by Osceola recruiting writer Nick Carlisle and recruiting legend, the man, the myth, Charles Fishbein. Guys, these days just keep getting strange around Florida State football program. It started getting weird yesterday when we started hearing more noise about Carter Smith going to Wisconsin, committing to Wisconsin after his official visit there this past weekend. As most of you know, Carter is a four-star 2025 quarterback prospect from Bishop Verot High School. And then last night, about 7:30, we got hit with a surprise. I had not heard this kid's name until yesterday, but FSU landed the commitment of 2025 four-star quarterback Kevin Sperry from Guyton High School in Denton, Texas. He had been committed to Oklahoma since March of 2023 and last was on Florida State's campus in the November of 2022 when he watched Florida State play Florida. And before that, his only other time on campus was for camp that summer. So I think we were all surprised, Fish, because of what we'd been hearing about Carter Smith. And as we've said, we thought he was leaning towards Florida State. Now, I think we'll get a little bit into Carter later, but I think it's important to point out that Carter Smith is still out there. He is not committed to Wisconsin. And you and I have heard from multiple people that Florida State is interested in taking two quarterbacks in this class. So it's not over yet. But, Fish, I want to get your reaction when you saw that they had taken the commitment of Kevin Sperry.
Well, I mean, they needed a quarterback in this class, but yeah, that was understanding with Tramel Jones was that he didn't like the idea that they wanted a second quarterback in the class. I think Carter was okay with it, from my understanding. So they wanted to. I don't blame them. You know, I keep saying with the 105 they should go. I had the chance to watch Perry. I don't want to destroy any kid from a highlight film. I've always said it's really.
Well, we're not going to let.
Speaking of destroying, somebody just destroyed his internet connection.
Fish putting out that bad juju. That computer said no. All right, Nick. Well, you broke the story for us last night. What was your reaction? Certainly a name that we had not heard. But what was your reaction to the commitment?
Well, we got Fish back here, so I'll let him finish his thought first.
Fish. Yeah. Now, what I was going to say is that it's very important to really be able to see these kids in person. I agree. I really think to judge and evaluate quarterbacks, you need an in-person evaluation. So watching a highlight film, you really – I don't know what the kid's like as far as his work ethic. If he's – I always go back to Christian Ponder. Christian Ponder and Blake Bortles are two of the worst quarterbacks I ever saw in a football camp setting. I mean, Bortles was so bad that the UCF staff had basically said, listen, we're recruiting him because he's a great athlete. We're going to put him at tight end. And if you don't know the kid's work ethic and what they're willing to do to get better, like a Christian Ponder who wasn't very good when he first got to Florida State, and they're willing to put in the time and work hard, you saw with Jordan Travis. Sometimes you don't know what's inside a kid. So if they're willing to improve their technique and their footwork and they're into things that will make them a better quarterback, that's why I really don't like to judge these kids fully until you get to meet them or see them in person, because there's so much you don't see on a highlight film. You don't see how the kid performs when they're behind in a game or in certain situations, or what the coach was calling on that play. Is a coach in high school making the read for the kid? A lot of times it's predetermined with these quarterbacks. So you really want to see them in a setting where where it's a college setting where these guys are getting the proper coaching. And like I said, their work ethic, You just don't know what's inside of a kid. Jordan wanted to be great. He worked hard to improve as a football player. I think you'll agree there's not a kid that you've probably seen in your years, Pat, where he started out. He wasn't a really high-end Division I quarterback, and he turned himself into a very good player at the college level. And that was all on him. That's what he wanted, and that's why he turned out to be as good as he did.
Yeah, I agree with you. I try not to make too many definitive statements when it comes to making high school evaluations because, you do see kids that play larger than their ability, play above their ability. Now, I think there's some questions about him. Listen, is his arm, does he have an elite arm? No, I don't think so. Does he do some things well? Yes. Is he a little bit on the small side at 6'1"? Yeah, but listen, we see that we see successful college quarterbacks around that height. But yeah, listen, well, Nick, go ahead because I want to ask you what your reaction was because you broke it for us. So I want to go back I got a question for Fish.
Yeah, my reaction was pretty similar to y'all's. I mean, I had never heard of the kid before, but that's because I only started working at the Osceola. What was it in
last
March?
Fall, really
the recruiting side last fall, but I've been working with y'all since I think early in 2023. So he wasn't. I had never heard of him before. So I quickly, I broke the story. Then I, tried to reach out to some people more familiar with him, reached out to a couple of guys in the Oklahoma camp, see what they had to say about him. As far as who he is as a prospect, I think there are some things you can work with there. I think what he's shown, at least especially in his senior tape, is his ability to navigate the pocket relatively well, be able to get out, and he runs hard. He's not afraid of contact. And he has some legs on him. So for all of those who are looking, at the Rivals database and saying, oh, why are we taking another pro quarterback? This kid can run a little bit. Now, granted, he's not the most elite athlete in that area, but he does have some legs on him. He does have a nice deep ball. He could deliver the ball over the top with a little bit of touch on it. But I was certainly more interested in who this kid was as a person and kind of the recruitment side of things because – when you're looking at this, you're looking at the kid's profile and you've seen he hasn't been on Florida State's campus since 2022. That's a long, long time in the recruiting world. That's a long time in general, but even more so on the recruiting side of things. So the reviews from those in the Oklahoma camp, I'm going to be honest, are not overwhelmingly positive. He had moved to Oklahoma either right before or directly after committing to Oklahoma. Then he moved back to Texas, which obviously he's there at Texas at Geyer High School for his senior year. And apparently there was some things behind the scenes that made Oklahoma not too sad to see him leave the class. Let's put it that way. So I don't know.
Natural reaction. They lost a commitment. That's a natural reaction.
It's a natural reaction,
you're reading of Oklahoma fan site. They're always going to err when they lose a commitment. It's always going to be, well, we didn't need him anyway. Yeah. So, yeah,
we've been great at that.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. Great at that.
Yeah.
Anyways, whether it's the opinion of the fan or it's the opinion of somebody who's a little bit more informed in terms of what's going on with the kid, I don't know. That's what I was told. Just relaying that. But we'll see. I think the more interesting aspect to this is potentially what this means in terms of the coaching side of things, which I'm sure we'll get into. Obviously, his quarterback coach is Kevin Johns, which does have a link to Norvell, so that obviously plays a pretty important piece in this.
Yeah, and if you're gonna go watch highlights, Fish and I just did our scouting report on Sperry. We both spent the morning watching his tape, and like Nick said, the kid had not been on campus since 2022, so he was kind of gone and forgotten about. Particularly with Florida State having Tramell Jones committed, and thought that Carter Smith might commit after Jones left. But so if you're watching his huddle highlights, he has his junior year highlights pinned to the top of his huddle page. His senior year highlights are directly below that. And I think the one, we could sit here nitpicking to death, but I think the one thing that I like about him is that he shows improvement in every area going from his junior to senior year tape. and he's bigger, he's faster, he throws the ball better, he's a more accomplished runner. He's listed as a pro style quarterback. He can run. I think he's run for over 1,800 yards in his high school career. He does throw a nice deep ball, nice touch. Throws a nice corner around the end zone. But you definitely see him getting better going from his junior year to his senior year. So as far as him trending as a player, I like where he's going. And again, listen, I think we speak too much in definitive terms when it comes to a player's prospect, potential as a prospect. And Fish. So this is my question to you. All right, both of us had questions about Tramel Jones coming off his junior film. We didn't get to see much of him as a senior because he only played in 2 games before he got hurt. But when I go back and I compare this kid, Kevin Sperry, as a senior on tape to what we saw out of Tramel Jones, I think this kid is a better prospect than Tramel. You may not agree with me when I ask you the question. I don't see this as if anything, they're equal as prospects. I don't see Tramel Jones being a better long-term prospect than Kevin Sperry. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was never really a fan of Tramel from the beginning, just because I thought in this day and age, and especially with FSU's O-line not being a strength this last year, is that I think quarterbacks need to be able to move, and this kid moves way, way better. I mean, it's like night and day. One's a real athlete. The other one is basically a pocket passer that's going to need everything ideal around him. And I think in this day and age of college football, unless you're Oregon, you're Ohio State, you're Georgia, where they recruit all these positions great around a kid, I think you need a guy that can make other players around him better. That's what made Jordan so good, is that this kid moves really well. And sometimes when plays break down and it's ugly, he can make an ugly play look good. And that's what you need. I don't think Tramel could do that at all. I think he would have been sacked 40 times in a season. I think that everything would have to be ideal around him. I'm not saying he can't make it, because the kid does have skills to play at the Division I level, but the skill set for what Florida State needs, I think this kid fits what they're looking for a lot better.
Listen, and I think we all agree that he's not a no-brainer, right? I mean, there's going to be questions, but I do think if you're going to make an evaluation, which I'm not talking about us, we've already done our evaluations, but if you're going to, as an FSU fan, if you want to make an evaluation on the kid, I think that you need to watch both his junior and senior highlights to get so you actually see the improvement, and you do. His pockets presence is much better. He's definitely faster. You can see that he's getting a little bit thicker. In his junior film, he looks a lot more like Luke Altmaier, if you guys remember, the kid that was committed to Florida State for a while, then ended up at Ole Miss, and now is at Illinois, starting for a ranked football team. But I think and listen, this is probably not going to go over very well, but I don't think he's dissimilar to what Brock Glenn was coming out of high school. Fish, do you think that's?
I think the kid has a little, and I don't want to, because Baker plays in the NFL. I think you could tell Baker's probably. I bet you if you interview the kid, Baker's probably one of the guys he idolized growing up. He has a little Baker in him. He also has a little Sam Howell. Very similar. I'd say he's in between those two guys, kind of like his skill set of what he can bring to the table. But I don't really. I can't remember Luke's film, to be honest with you. It's
been a long time.
Yeah, so I'd have to go back and watch.
Yeah, no,
dude, he's one of the 10 quarterbacks that has been committed to FSU to decommit. Yeah. So I did listen. I wasn't like Altmaier's turned out to be a solid quarterback, but he has skill sets that you do like. But it's going to be up to him how good he wants to be. Like I said, there's certain things I like. There were things on film that did concern me, but like I said, I don't know what those coaches, if they predetermine. A lot of times these schools predetermine where they want a kid to go, or they don't really give the kid the options of where to go. They just say, hey, throw to this guy, whether he's open or not. And that's how it works. So, and I'd be interested in knowing, and I don't, and I'd like to find out, has Florida State seen him play in person this year?
So we'll all see him in person next year.
Yeah, I don't think so, man.
I mean, we'll all see him in person next week because he's coming on an official visit. But we'll see what he looks like. But yeah, when I was comparing him to Altmaier, not necessarily ability wise, just as a junior, their bodies look similar. Now you can see that this kid is going to be develop more physically. He's already bigger than Altmaier was as a senior. But yeah, it's funny that you mentioned Baker Mayfield because you, in your evaluation, obviously you talked about it being a shorter quarterback. And so I wrote Baker Mayfield, Sam Hartman's probably a little bit bigger than 6'1", but you got Gardner Minshew 6'1".
Yeah. I think Sam Howell, I think Dillon Gabriel, these guys. Yeah. I'm sure Dillon Gabriel probably looked like this kid in high school, and that's why he ended up at UCF. I mean, it happens. I mean, it's a one position I studied religiously, and Herbert was like the 50th rated quarterback in the country. And ended up a first-round pick. So you just never know with these kids. Yeah.
Well, listen, like you said, they needed one. I think, and I agree with you. There are some questions like he does have great touch. He runs a RPO-driven offense, so he's similar with some of the concepts. But what you really don't see him do, and I don't know how big a deal it is, but you don't see him throw that deep out. So you got questions on. I don't think he has elite arm strength, but can he throw that pass? Can he throw the entire route tree kind of thing? But listen, I think he's a solid guy. One of the things I do want to talk about, because I'm not saying this is true. I'm just saying that I don't know. Coincidence does happen from time to time, but here's the thing. Oklahoma's quarterback coach used to be Norvell's former OC at Memphis in his last year at Memphis, Kevin Johns. And Kevin was the OC at Duke last year for Elko. Do you guys believe there could be any connection between that and Kevin Johns eventually filling a role at Florida State on the offensive side of the ball, whether it's quarterbacks coach, receivers coach, tight ends coach? He's coached them all. I'm not saying he's up for the OC's job. I'm not saying he's not either. I'm sure there's been a conversation about multiple roles because he does have a past with Mike. But do you think there's any connection between the two, Fish?
I'm sure they've had some conversations off the record. I just can't imagine this thing was just this fluky. Things like this aren't coincidental. I know some other people are posting that this kid reached out to Florida State just out of nowhere. I just don't buy that. I don't think this kid's
so
checking.
To think of this as like a.
Well, if that's all it takes,
it's so much of a coincidence. I don't see how you could not reach the conclusion that there's something more tied up to it than that. This is so out of the blue. He wasn't on any of our radars, any of the other recruiting services radars.
I'm sure
there has to be a link.
I'm sure the kid wasn't watching this 1-9 Florida State football team and going, "Oh, let me look at their commit list. They may need a quarterback. Oh, wait a second, their kid just left. Let me give them a call and see if they're interested."
If that's all it takes, I'm going to give them a call and say, "Hey, listen, I need you to be assistant director of football operations." I've done that before. All right. So listen. Usually where there's smoke, there's fire. We'll find out relatively soon because I do think that a guy like Kevin will be, if he is hired, will be here basically the day after the season's over. But it is interesting because obviously I would have to think, to your point, Fish, particularly if Florida State has not seen this kid play in person this year, those back channel conversations are having, hey, what do you like about this kid? What do you don't like about this kid? You've seen him, you've met him. We know things happen in the background. It's just the way football works, right? I mean, during the season, if you got a buddy that's coached against your opponent, going back to that old sign stealing argument, we had last year about the Michigan. Listen, all this, there's a lot of things conversations that happen between buddies that are coaches. So, listen, maybe it was pure coincidence. Every now and then it does happen. But as I said last night, it just feels like there's something to it.
Pat, I did bring it up that whoever they're bringing in as a coach is going to bring some players with them. I think this may fit under that.
Well, I thought about that when I sent that tweet out last night. I was like, this is right. They're
Don't worry. Listen, I'm usually wrong, and then eventually I'm right. but it takes like 2 or 3 years. So
a blind squirrel finds a nut every once in a while.
No, I find them. It just takes a while. I go down a long path where there's no.
You got to plant the seed and allow it to develop, to grow. You put water on it and all those good things. All right, so let's talk a little bit about Carter Smith, because Fish, you, as I said before, you and I have both heard from different people that Florida State wants to bring in 2 quarterbacks with this class. There were some people, I mean, a ton of people dropping future cast, crystal balls, rabbits out of the hat, whatever they do at any of these sites to make predictions, saying that Wisconsin's going to end up with him, which is different than last week, because I believe like 98% of predictions were for Florida State. I think this week it's probably 98% have him going to Wisconsin, but we're still over 2 weeks away from early National Signing Day. Carter Smith is not committed to anybody. How do you think Florida State is still in it for Carter Smith? Do you think they still want to take 2 quarterbacks? And if it's not Carter, who are some other options for Florida State if they wanted to go after a second quarterback?
Yeah, I think you're going to get your answer this pretty quickly this weekend. The kid's supposed to visit for this game, or was supposed to visit for the Gator game, one of the two. If he doesn't visit, I think you can pretty much write him off. If he visits and takes that visit to Florida State, I'm sure that's part of the deal, is that Norvell's probably been – and the staff has been communicating with the kid and trying to make sure that he does take that visit. That's why he probably hasn't committed yet. Somebody's been in his ear and said, listen, just, a lot of times that's what happens. Hey, yeah, you like Wisconsin, let's take the Florida State visit. And then, Wisconsin's going to try to convince him not to take it. So there's going to be some back and forth. It'll be interesting to see what happens. If he takes a visit, where Florida State sits with the kid,
Yep. I know that you and Nick both brought up before we started that if it was not Carter Smith, that it could be a kid by the name of Kamari Taylor, who is currently committed to Mississippi State. I know that you value Levy's evaluation process. What do you know about Kamari, and what should FSU fans know about Kamari Taylor?
Yeah, I mean, he's a bigger kid. I think this kid's a little more like the quarterback that's at South Carolina this year. That's a young kid that is doing really well. The Sellers kid, he's a bigger, more physical kid. Also beat you with his legs. He has a good arm. But yeah, I always look at history of coaches and the success they have. I think that Levy's one of the better evaluators at quarterbacks. He's done a very good job at all the stops he's been at. So if he likes them, I always look at those guys look at. I've always looked at history of coaches and quarterbacks. I think it's important because there's some guys that seem, even when they find these guys in the 30s and 40s, they always seem to hit. Art Briles was one of those guys for a long time. You look at the other kid that we just watched. He's probably more refined as a passer, but this kid has a stronger arm, can push the ball further down the field. So I think he's a little more like Antoine Hill, the kid that I liked early on from Memphis. Very, very big kid, has needs some work on his mechanics and stuff. But you can see, like I said, Levy has a good eye for this. And I always respect guys that are able to evaluate these quarterbacks, especially at schools where you have to evaluate them and take chances. And there's a greater risk for error, but they always seem to find those guys. So,
well, it was definitely an interesting evening for late afternoon and evening for Florida State on the quarterback recruiting front. It will be interesting to see what ultimately happens with Carter Smith. That could break any moment now. That could break next week, or who the hell knows? It may string out to December 4th. But listen, I don't think it's. Listen, if the kid's not committed, and even if he is committed to somebody, as we just saw, we've seen a tremendous amount of flips over the last week, not only at Florida State. We just saw Juju Lewis flip from USC to Colorado, and we got a flip alert of our own now going on into this weekend with Florida State. So we're done with the good news.
Listen. The over under on wins or recruits. The recruits are winning. So If one of the Desir twins decides to stay and the other one leaves, we may go under 2, but which would really be sad. But right now, the over under is it's holding strong. The over on recruits over wins this year. So
and let's stick on at that point because we'll stick with the good news for a while. Then we'll get to the bad news in a second. But all right, so they do have 4 official visits this weekend, 3 of which are committed. And 2 of those are the Desir twins, Daryl Desir and Mandrell Desir. And you had some good things to say about what some people saw in them last night. And
I spoke to a coach that played against them last night, and he said those 2 were about as impressive of defensive linemen that he's seen in a long time. He said both of them dominated their team. It's in the playoffs, so it's high stakes. Both of these guys, they're part of a defense that's probably one of the best defenses in Florida this year. So Norland could make a run because of guys like these 2. It's crazy. It's 2 years in a row Norland had twins. FSU's offered both pairs. The last pair ended up at Rutgers, and this pair looks like it's going to end up at FSU. But I think both of them are, like you said, one's a lot better. The other one, though, you've seen it a lot of times where the other one may possibly work harder and end up the better of the players. It's happened many times.
Well, and I also think Mandrell's who you're talking about. He plays defensive tackle, and I do think you will see him. A lot of times we get enamored with length and size, and he's about 6'3", probably about 255, 260 right now. But he does play with great leverage, and he is explosive off the ball. I'd like to. He does play a little bit of that read and react defense at his high school. I'd like to see him play more as a penetrator, but we'll see what happens. And I do think the other kid's got a chance to be a really good. I have him I think he's listed as a weak side defensive end. I think he's more of a strong side defensive end at the college level. But they're good prospects, and probably the biggest name. Uncommitted guy that's coming in is Jordan Scott, wide receiver, 6'7". Nick, what do we need to know about Jordan coming into this weekend?
Just that he's if you're looking for a Johnny Wilson lookalike, he's about as close as you're going to get. He's currently committed to Arizona State. I know Fish has said that that's so he has a spot if Florida State doesn't end up pushing and taking him. But this is a guy that's one of the more highly rated JUCO players to come out in this cycle, and he's got certainly the physical attributes that Mike Norvell has fallen in love with in terms of his big wide receivers. So it definitely, with a class that currently doesn't have any wide receiver commits, this is somebody that I think they're going to really try to make a good run at.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. He's got to beat his old buddy Kenny Dillingham for this guy.
Well, I mean, the one thing I can tell you is a friend of mine that does what I do, but does it for the JUCO ranks and for transfers, told me this is the number 1 receiver in JUCO this year. So he thinks very highly of him. I respect the guy's opinion. He felt like basically that this was, holding a spot at Arizona State. Florida State, the kid really idolizes Johnny Wilson. I believe he's spoken to him. Wilson has told him, unlike one of the other receivers supposedly turning away, but this kid has been told to go there, that they're going to develop him like they did with Johnny. He likes what Johnny's done, not only, what he did at Florida State. So it's helped them a lot in this kid's recruitment. So,
it's listen, they do need a shot in the arm at receiver in the worst way. So hopefully that weekend will go well for Florida State, and
we're going option, man. We're going option. We're going to be Army's offense next year.
Well, they especially need a shot in the arm because Javon Boggs has shut down his recruitment yesterday. So that's an important note to make. So I didn't think Florida State was going to land him anyways, but still, that's another guy that you at least had a shot at that has decided to shut things down and not show up here. So
the good thing is they recruited 10 receivers last year, so a few of them meet up paying out.
And the early returns on a lot of them look pretty good. I mean, I really like Luane. I like BJ. Haven't seen too much of Elijah yet on the field, so there's a good group. There's a good nucleus of young receivers. There you go.
Listen, we still got to make it through portal season, so we'll start talking about 2020.
Oh, come on, positivity, Pat. Positivity.
Yeah, I'm just saying. Let's not count our chickens.
Fuswama or whatever the guy said from anger management. Fuswama.
Yeah.
Yeah, poor Pat. We got to get him in anger management for
Serenity now.
Be happy, man. We got a commitment.
Yoga or something.
I've had a smile on my face the entire
Kevin Sperry,
podcast.
the 4-star Oklahoma quarterback none of us have seen, is going to bring us a national championship.
I think he's going to win a Heisman.
He is.
All right.
Man.
So I'm trying to be positive now. Trying to be positive. All right. So we've done the positive part of the show. There are 2.5 visits we need to keep an eye on this weekend. I heard on Monday morning from a trusted source that FSU running back commit Byron Lewis was going to visit Florida this weekend. What I did not know is that he'd already been there last weekend, so he's going back for his second visit. This is an official visit, and he's taking his parents. I think if the visit goes well, Fish, we're probably looking at another decommitment over the weekend, probably Sunday or Monday. That was one of the few guys that I know you thought had a chance to come in and earn some playing time right away, because obviously Florida State's going to lose a couple running backs to graduation. Any chance from what you're hearing that Florida, I mean, I guess there's always a chance. How good or bad do you feel about Florida State's chances in actually landing Lewis or keeping Lewis in this class?
Well, listen, I mean, he committed when Florida State had like 1 win and like 7 losses. So I don't think the losing has anything to do with it. He's been interested in Florida State. Miami could have easily landed him if they had recruited him, but he likes Florida State. I think he likes Coach Johnson, the running back coach.
You're right, Coach Johnson.
All right, dude, I couldn't remember.
There's a lot of coaches.
Oh yeah,
Coach
Coach, what's his name? Yak.
Yeah.
All right, Coach Yak.
Yards after catch, baby.
Oh yeah.
Or yards after contact, because these running backs get hit in the backfield. But continue.
All right, so I think that the kid too with Patrick Surtain hasn't left the staff yet. I still think if he's still on the staff, that FSU will still have a legit shot at keeping him in the class. We got to see how this is. I mean, yeah, he's going to take a visit, but Florida's got 2 running backs committed. He is the only running back committed in Florida State's class, so I do believe the chance to get on the field quicker at Florida State's there, unlike Florida where they are in a good spot running back position-wise. So if the kid wants to see the field, I think Florida State's a better option, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Then Peyton Joseph, Nick, you reported that he was at Georgia Tech last night. Out of the 4 offensive line commits, well, now 3. If you're gonna have to lose one, that would be the guy that I would not mind. But they probably, as Fish said, they're gonna go through the portal for guards anyway. But what do you guys? I'll ask you, Nick, since you've been reporting it more than Fisher. What do you think happens with Peyton Joseph? You think he's in this class? You think he ends up at Georgia Tech?
I don't know. I think that depends on Georgia Tech. I think that depends on how many offensive linemen they want to take. Obviously, they already have Petty. They've got a couple of other 3-stars, I believe, that just shut down their recruitments. One might have just become a 4-star. So I think that really the answer to that question relies on Brett Key and, how many offensive linemen he wants to bring into this class. I remember when we were talking about Georgia Tech back when Josh Petty was still in play, they really want to have a big splash of a class. And though I know you and I feel a particular way about Joseph as pertains to how his outlook as a prospect, but he still is a 4-star prospect. It still would be an addition to their class. It just depends really on whether Georgia Tech wants to take him. I don't know. It's kind of weird. I don't know how serious the public flirtation is, but he was there last night, so it's at least at a certain level of serious. So I don't know. It'll be interesting. If I had to choose right now, I couldn't call it.
Well, they got 6. So, hello?
Yeah,
hello?
We got you.
Did I bounce off?
You're up and running now.
Yeah, I was going to say that they got 6 O-linemen committed to them. FSU has an O-line coaching issue. They need an O-line coach. Can we just hire Georgia Tech's coach and bring all 6 of these guys with them? I mean, heck, the class will go up in ranking real quick. So,
I didn't even realize it was that many. I thought it was 3 or 4 already, not 6. So that even kind of reinforces what I was feeling about it. It's like, I mean, I'm sure Joseph might be looking at his other options, but realistically, I don't know if Georgia Tech is. I know that they like Joseph, but I don't know if they like him enough to bring in a 7th offensive lineman in the class.
Well, he does have a cousin that plays on this football team too, and TJ Ferguson, so that probably helps Florida State in that regard.
Oh man!
And I in the past I thought that was what would keep him here and not looking, but obviously when you fire the offensive line coach, that opens up some doors, and he's certainly evaluating his options.
Well, and plus I think they all want to have a reaction on Twitter. I mean, everybody does.
Oh, I'm sure that's part of it, especially with Joseph. Yeah. That was certainly a thing when he was still committed to Florida, if you remember. So
the way that TJ's played this year, he owes us one. Like, dude, you better convince your freaking cousin or brother, whoever he is, to come.
Listen, and the last kid that I'd keep on the entire class, but the last kid we're going to talk about outside of Solomon Thomas, I think the interesting thing is Solomon Thomas anywhere this weekend. We don't know that he will be, but will he? My concern is he's going to end up in Gainesville this weekend. We'll see. I will definitely get a text on Saturday morning if that turns out to be true. But Kevin Wynn is going to be at South Carolina on an unofficial visit. He took an official visit there in June, took a visit there for less than a month ago for their Texas A&M game. It's not the school I thought would flip Kevin Wynn, but it certainly looks like the Gamecocks are going to be the school that flips Kevin Wynn. Nick, what are you hearing?
Yeah, just everything that I've heard kind of reinforces what we reported earlier in the week, that if he's flipping anywhere, it's going to be South Carolina. Georgia was obviously the most attractive option for a long time in terms of potential suitors to flip Wynn away from Florida State. But from what I am understanding, I think Florida defensive tackle commit Jeremiah McLeod, who, as you know, took an official visit here a couple weeks ago, I think he right now is the most likely to wind up in the Georgia class. So I think that has also steered Kevin more so towards South Carolina. I would fully expect him to flip his commitment this weekend, or at least sometime soon.
Yeah, it's it'd be great. That leaves them with just one defensive tackle in the class, and of course we know this is going to be a portal heavy class, but I would like to have seen them hold on to as many of these guys, because at some point you got to be able to retain guys or get guys. I think it's going more 50-50 than I ever thought it would when it comes portal to high school, but I was hoping they'd be able to hold on to a kid like him, because I think he's got a chance to be a really good player.
He's a good player. Listen, the reality is, all right, and I wasn't trying to make a statement that this class isn't important, or this class will not affect them till 2 or 3 years down the road.
Yes,
and then
I agree with that.
But it's not going to affect them next year. And right now they got so many issues. Like to me, you know how I feel. O-line, D-line, as many as you could get to come in, because it's the one position that has the highest bus rate. You just don't know. It's really a numbers game a lot of time, unless a kid's just so elite. But a lot of these guys, you just want to bring them in, because 2 years from now, when you have a dearth of talent, these are the guys that are going to come in and play for you. So that's where it becomes a problem. And then you're forced to go to the portal again, and you want to get out of this need of the portal. The portal really should be icing on the cake and not the cake itself. And that's the problem, is they put themselves in this position once again where they got to go heavy in the portal just to field a team. And it is going to catch up to them in 2 or 3 years. But really, Mike can't worry about 2-3 years from now. He's got to worry about next year. So I think that's
I do think that, to your point, I think that, I think maybe the more disappointing thing to me in this class starting to wither away to basically, if we're right about all 3 of these kids, you're down to less than 10. Now we've seen Dion be very successful with that model. And I think it's they've struggled at times over the 5 years and landing the top prospects that they want. They have a obviously had a shallow pool of players that they brought in for official visits this year, and as the season played out, it didn't work out. But I'm just saying, I think we all agree. Now you can get a bump on this with new coaches and this new hiring process that's going to go on. But I think, is it fair to say that the high school recruiting that happened over the last 5 years under Norvell has not lived up to what we thought it would be? And this is another example of that.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of my biggest concerns coming from Memphis. He was, at that time, the portal for him was the junior college ranks. There was no transfer portal. When guys did transfer, it was like they had to be a graduate transfer. There was more restrictions with this movement that they have now. So he built his teams that way. He got to Florida State, and he had two choices. Either he could gut the whole program down to its core, and what happens is, a lot of times, I've spoken to coaches about this. Most coaches will tell you it's probably best, especially on a team that wasn't good and the roster wasn't good, to gut it year one than to wait, because by the time you wait, a lot of times you get fired. Most coaches will tell you Mario gutted University of Miami down. Even though they had highly rated kids, he gutted that program, and he took those hits those first 2 years, and then this year he had built it back up and then got that cornerstone quarterback, and he got those pieces that you need to win more games. It may not get you over the hump, but it's going to get. Mike kind of took the cheat sheet and went and did the portal, and this was my biggest concern. We discussed this many times, was that eventually this was going to catch up to you. And the 2021 and 22 class, along with a lot of good football players all leaving at one time, has gutted this roster. And most of the talent, I think you guys will agree, most of their best talent is in that 23 and 24 classes. And those guys just are not ready to play at this level. It's not that they won't be, or they won't be very good football players in college. But Pat, you know this. I think we've learned everybody wants to play those freshman quarterbacks. You know why those guys don't usually play right away. What we're seeing is why coaches are afraid to play young players. It's just the mistakes. Listen, football's a lot of it's mental. And if you're not prepared mentally, you're going to play slower. You're not going to react as quickly. And all the skill set you have is getting beat because you're just not prepared as a football player to play in a game. And you've seen that this year. We've seen more mental breakdowns from a football team this year than probably the last 10 years combined. And that's just.
Yeah. And listen, you're right. When you're not going to process information as quickly as a freshman. And people see one quarterback do it at another school, and they think their quarterback should be able to do it. Like you're seeing Lenore Sellers at South Carolina have an outstanding year. And I think people want Luke or Brock to be Lenore Sellers. But here's the problem. He's playing behind a competent offensive line and some good running backs and some good receivers. In Florida State might have some competent running backs, but outside of that, it's hard. But and listen, I think the portal, and we'll save this for another day because we're after the Florida game, we're going to be talking a ton about the portal. You mentioned the 2023, 23, and 2024 recruiting classes for Florida State. They got to recruit those guys again. I mean, they're recruiting them right now, so I think it's going to be very interesting. We've said it before. This is a huge offseason for Mike Norvell as it pertains to the long-term future at Florida State. And you're right, we're going to see more portal kids brought into this program than we've seen in the last probably 2 years combined, right? I mean, we're talking about double the numbers. I think roster limit goes up to 105. Now, you don't have to scholarship 105, but you can't have more than 105. But anyway, it's going to be interesting to see how it all works out. But it's an interesting time, and it's been interesting this week, really interesting all season. But, the reason we're on here is because we got a surprise at quarterback last night. And I appreciate Nick and Fish jumping on. If you're not an Osceola subscriber, please go to theosceola.com or floridastate.rivals.com. We've got our scouting report where Fish and I share our thoughts on the quarterback commit from Kevin Sperry and what we've seen from him on film. Nick's got the Florida State flipping him from last night. It's up on the board. Jerry Cutts has got the in how the House settlement, House NCAA settlement could affect the future of college football in the wild, wild west of the NIL era. We've got our scatter report on Charleston Southern, the Buccaneers. Now, it's a very abbreviated scatter report, so just some things you need to know. We also talk about Kurt Weiler's got his article on Mike Norvell value recruiting and upcoming staff changes. And we've got a factor of fiction on whether it matters or not who starts, whether it's Luke Kromenhawk or Brock Glenn against Charleston Southern after Mike Norvell named them co-starters coming into this week. We'll see how that plays out, but we appreciate you joining us. Please subscribe to the Osceola YouTube channel before you leave us. Fish, I'm sure you've got some football games to work today, don't you?
Yeah, it's playoff season. I went to one game last night, Booker T versus Cardinal Gibbons, and I thought the game was going to be good, and boy, was I wrong. It's 47-0. So it just shows you, man, Booker T ran by them kids.
If you're looking for something to do around 4:30 tomorrow, Mark Salva and I will be doing our post-game show, and we're hoping for a winning post-game show. We haven't had one of those for a while, so if you like,
oh my God, poor Salva, man. I know this season's been brutal on him, man. They need a win and a good win. It can't. Let's 42-0 type game. So let's.
Yeah, I got it. I think I got it 35-12. I think that was my pick. Oh, wow. And we'll also have our predictions, and we're not doing keys to a victory last night. If you're an Osceola subscriber and you read our keys to a victory, we're doing things to look for because we all think they're going to win. So we've just done what we like to see because of the coaching changes in the last 2 weeks of the program, last 2 weeks of the season, kind of some things that we would like to see from this football team and areas of improvement and efficiency and production and all those type of things. But we will be back tomorrow, Mark Salva and myself, potentially Fish at around 4:30 to have a little bit of an abbreviated post-game show depending on how the game plays out. Hopefully it'll play out like we think, and Florida State will cruise to a homecoming victory and win number 2 on the season. But appreciate you guys joining us, and we'll see you tomorrow night after the game. Boys, have a good Friday night. Nick, enjoy the homecoming festivities down there in College Town.
I'm going to be freezing my you-know-what off.
Go down and check out, as Jerry's put, go down and check out the number of cowboy boots you see riding around on campus. But Kelly FSU, former FSU quarterback Kelly Lowry's on the show right now. He said, be nice to have an injury-free, clean game. I agree with that. I would like to see them have some confidence coming out of this game, getting ready to take on arch rival Florida. Anything can happen in a rivalry game, I guess. So I'd like to see them come out of this game with some confidence, renewed energy behind Randy Shannon leading the defense, and see what kind of see if the offense looks more coordinated, for lack of a better term, because it has looked disjointed all year. But we'll be back on Saturday about 4:30. Appreciate y'all listening, and we'll talk to you soon.